Little recap video of a recent 5-0 with 64 card Mono Green Cloudpost. I was inspired by Unzd MTG to just try it out for funsies. He tweeted something about running hot on a 64 card list, and so I was inspired to just try a 64 card list out myself. So for the extra cards, we got a couple exploration for early acceleration. Usually you want it turn 1 or after you have a ring online. Can really be useful. The other cards are just an extra green source via a forest and a maze of Ithir as well. Everything else is pretty standard. No Elvish Spirit Guides. I've been really missing map. I actually want to go up to 4 of them. So I'm running a couple maps in this league, and we got pretty standard sideboard as far as like what I've been running lately. Endurance Surgical, Galactique for combo, Force of Vigors, and Carpets of Flowers. Yeah, a couple dismembers for those pesky Magus of the Moons and opposition agents. Without further ado, let's jump into those matches. Alright, game 1. Round 1, game 1. Lead off on Glimmer Post here and Pithing Needle, since we're kind of all in on colorless. We just want to make sure that our mana base is protected here. Follow that up with a Cloudpost. And the decision to name Wasteland on the Blind pays off. We are facing something with black and white and Thoughtseize. What's that? Probably Death and Taxes. Yeah, so we untap here, and we're just setting ourselves up for a, what's that? An Ulamog, you say? Yes, please. So if we untap here and our opponent doesn't have a port, basically we're looking at a nice Ulamog here, exiling our opponent's useful and relevant stuff. Get rid of their white source and their wasteland. I think they scoop here after this Ulamog resolves. In game 2, we get into a little bit rocky territory as I make some really weird plays. Looks like a great starting 7 against TNT here. We lead off on Once Upon a Time. Drop ourselves a forest, get a Cloudpost. Map it up. Our opponent moves their Vial up. Gets a Stoneforge Mystic and this Trailblazer's Torch. We decide to Green Sun Zenith for Elvish Reclaimer. Our opponent plays a Skyclave Apparition, taking our Reclaimer. Our opponent vials in something, nothing. They're just activating it. That's what the good vial players do. They activate it even if they don't put something in. So our opponent takes our 1 ring, surprisingly. Now here we're in a place where if I had played this ideally, I think the game would have easily been won. Next turn I should have led on Cloudpost. Tabernacle doesn't really do a whole lot right here. So that was kind of a crazy sequence there. I think if I would have just dropped a Cloudpost and then waited to see if they had Wasteland or anything and just copied it with stage at the end of their turn, that's by far the best play to be doing there. So this essentially, playing that Tabernacle just really slowed down the game. And check this out. So I go for a Green Sun Zenith for 1, getting a Reclaimer for some reason. And the thing about that is, like, Reclaimer's there to get us to the lands we need in order to be able to cast Primetime or to work up to Ulamog. But I already had the mana to be able to work to Primetime, so I'm not sure if I was just tired here or what, but Well, looking back, it's a little bit embarrassing, but you know what? We all make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. That opposition agent too there, they revealed that, right? So that should have been something really telling about the play. So at that point they already had the opposition agent in hand in a vial on 3. They can essentially respond to anything I do, like my Reclaimer, my Titan. So probably the best way to win from here would be like just Titan into Titan. And again, now my Cloudpost is tapped. Um, Reclaimer, I should have just given it up to the Tabernacle there. That way I could have had a Cloudpost to turn sooner, untap, and get these Titans here. Instead, I opted for paying for it yet again, um, and just totally punted there. Let's pretend that didn't happen. So let's go to game 3, and I think this one is going to be a bit smoother. Exploration in hand was really sweet on the opening. You saw I got to drop 2 lands there. Our opponent thought seized us and took our crop rotation, and then draw here, play a Cloudpost and a Tabernacle, make a second Cloudpost, which is huge. So turn 3 we're gonna have like 6 mana, which is pretty insane. This is gonna be a turn 3 Primeval Titan. So these are the kind of like reasons why I like exploration. But on the flip side of that, if you don't have any gas mid game and you're top decking, you don't want to draw exploration. It doesn't feel great. Um, so now we're set up here to basically close the game from here. Our opponent was able to take care of our prime time, but we have enough mana to fetch and cast Ulamog and cast Emrakul. Then we untap and attack. Our opponent doesn't concede, which makes me think they probably have Solitude, but they don't. They sacrifice everything and untap, and the Caracas is not going to really do anything because obviously, you know, we'll just cast it again and take infinite turns. But they end up having the Solitude, taking care of Emmy. But guess what? There's more where that came from. Ivugan's got something to say about that. So end up tutoring up a Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger. Exile their remaining land with the trigger on the stack. I forgot to copy their Caracas, so what I did was I held priority, and then I was able to do that in time and copy their Caracas. So now I just have Ulamog every turn. They scoop. That was round 1. Round 2, I think, is versus 4-color Control. It's a pretty weird match in that I end up making some very strange plays again. Keep a 7 with Once Upon a Time I Found the Green Source. Put a Reclaimer into play. Opponent leads off on Triome. We draw a colorless source. That way we'll be able to activate Glacial Chasm. Our opponent plays Land Go. Swords to Plowshares. In response, we get a Yavimaya, and I think the main reasoning for that was because all of the rest of my lands in my hand didn't produce mana, so Yavimaya turns those on. Otherwise, I probably would have just gotten a Cloudpost. Our opponent plays up the Beanstalk, then we untap with 3 mana, so that's good. play the One Ring. One ring to rule them all. But for some reason, you can have 4 in your deck. That's some powerful magic right there. So there I decided to draw a card, and they responded with Leyline Binding. I could have just held off and wait till they were tapped out to draw a card, but at that point, they can always pretty much have 1 mana open, so I just decided to try my luck, make them have the Leyline Binding. I can get it back later on if I want to. Our opponent at this point is pretty far ahead. We don't really have much going on. We don't have any of the lands that we want this late in the game. Our opponent's got a full grip of 7 cards. They force will our crop rotation. Our last resort is to play Glacial Chasm. And yeah, from here they're able to steal our Pithing Needle if they want to. They wasteland our Dark Depths. We put out a Cloudpost into play. And we pay some life, just kind of hoping to top deck something. At this point, though, we're pretty far behind. Got a couple turns left. So our opponent casts Leyline Binding, which gives them the ability to wasteland our Glacial Chasm, and that's good game. Game 2 on the play. Let's see how this one went. So pretty reasonable opening 7 there. We let off on Cloudpost. Our opponent leads on a Triome. Then we drew into Vesua, play that. Our opponent goes ahead and plays up the Beanstalk. We untap and decide to play 2 maps for some reason. That was a strange play. So the first one was okay. Could have got our forest, which is what we did, cracked it. I guess the second one, the reason why you wouldn't want to play that out is because if you only have 1 mana up and play out the expedition map, you're giving your opponent the chance to cast Leyline Binding on it, and I believe that's exactly what they did. On the other hand, if you want to bait out one of their Leyline Bindings, oh no, so it was even worse than Leyline Binding. Our opponent stole it with Dack Fade-In. Knowing fully well our opponent was on Dack Fade-In from game 1, we definitely, that's another reason not to cast the expedition map unless we have the mana to crack it. However, we did end up with a nice top deck there. I think, yeah, UWGR and Cloudpost is the way to go there. We ended up getting those, and our opponent was able to source the plowshares and besiege our land. And keep in mind, they stole our expedition map with their Dack Fade-In, so they can get another wasteland too if they want. So then we got Bog. I think the idea behind getting Bog was because they had Besiege in their graveyard, so if they found a Life from the Loam, they'd be able to still keep blowing up our land. So I think that was my idea behind that. We do have an Echoing Deeps in hand, so if they wasteland UWGR, then we can just get it back with Echoing Deeps. There's also a crop rotation here available for us. So if our opponent wastelands, we can respond by casting a crop rotation. So our opponent does get the wasteland with the expedition map, but for some reason doesn't wasteland and lets us untap. We have 16 mana available. During our upkeep, they decide to wasteland our Cloudpost, and we crop rotation in response, and our opponent forces it, which is 1 less force we have to worry about for resolving an Ulamog. After this point, our opponent concedes. Ulamog's going to get us back our prime time, and it's GG from there. That was a very forgiving game. It doesn't always go like that, but So this is a fantastic opening hand against control. Just two lands, but we have two Carpet of Flowers and two very, very juicy payoffs there. Got a Ring and a Primeval Titan. Yes, please. So now we got a couple different choices. Lead off a Once Upon a Time, of course. Get a Cloudpost. Our opponent plays a Beans again. Untap here. Drawing into a Reclaimer. Play the Reclaimer. I didn't play the Cloudpost because I want to be able to copy it with Thespian Stage in case our opponent is playing like a Wasteland. We don't want to lose the Thespian Stage. So our opponent casts Leyline Binding on our Elvish Reclaimer and follows it up with Ponder. They're going to have 5 cards in hand at the end of turn. Then we get to untap and draw into a Reclaimer again. Play Carpet of Flowers. Now we finally have enough blue mana. So that was cool. Able to copy our Cloudpost, and next turn we're just going to untap with a bunch of mana. So they got our Cloudpost with Besiege You again, and then we untap, add some mana to our, decide not to add some mana to our mana pool. We want to wait till the second Carpet of Flowers is in the mix. So our opponent has four cards in hand. It's time to jam. I think it's prime time. So that you'll see I used the crop rotation there. That was just to bait out any potential counter spells. If they counter it, okay, sure, I'll cast my prime time. If they don't counter it, I'll get my Cavern of Souls to make sure that my prime time resolves. And you'll see here I have 7 mana, so I would have been able to cast prime time in any case there. But against blue decks, crop rotation plays like that a lot at this stage of the game. You use it as a counter bait, and it's kind of just like an ace up the sleeve. Now, okay, so here you'll see I went for Dark Depths, which was very strange. Ivugan, yeah, that's a great card to get. Dark Depths, I think that was supposed to be another Cloudpost. I think my rationale was that I have a Thespian Stage out already, but that's not really the right way to do it, because I mean you're not really going to want to go for a depths kill against a deck that has 4 Leyline Binding and 4 Swords to Plowshares. It's just not realistic, and you're just going to 2-for-1 yourself. So yeah, that should have been a Cloudpost, but it looks like our opponent couldn't draw into anything relevant. They knew we were going to untap and brutalize them, so they scooped. Alright, so after that we got round 3 against Ali, who is an insane lands player, an MTGO grinder. Amazing Magic the Gathering player. He is the pioneer of this really cool blue lands deck right now that he's been running hot with, which you should check it out. Definitely check it out. Basically, it runs like Mox Diamonds and um, Uro, Force of Wills, and it's a very spicy deck. Now, you'll see here, he's just playing more of a traditional lands build. So Reclaimer's an all-star in this matchup. Oh, so he is on Brainstorm. I'm not sure about the rest of the blue, but he is splashing blue at least for Brainstorm on this build. So leading off on the Pithing Needle to protect our mana base against Wasteland. That's what we always want to do against fair decks that run Wasteland. And sometimes you'll even cast the second one and name Wasteland, depending on the situation. Other times you'll have to, against lands, you'll have to name Blast Zone or Thespian Stage. Urza Saga is often a common one to name. So here we just decide to start ramping into Cloudpost. And in order to keep their graveyard in check, I wanted to lead off on Bojuka Bog. That way, if they cast a Life from the Loam or a Crucible of Worlds, we have the Bog out there already, so we can sacrifice one of our lands and get a Vesuva targeting Bojuka Bog. Basically, the way you beat this lands matchup is you have to keep them off of their graveyard. Because if they get Life from the Loam engine online and are able to just keep recurring their lands, especially with exploration, it's just there's no way we can keep up with that. So you'll see here, I sacrifice the Thespian Stage, get a Bojuka Bog, and exile their whole um, graveyard, which essentially kind of blanked their whole turn in a way. Note here that they have Blast Zone up there, so they could blow everything up next turn. This turn they only had one more forest, so they didn't have enough mana to blow everything up. On the other hand, they will lose their own exploration when they blow it up. So I get Elemental here, and I just decide to. It's time to cast that. I don't want them to dredge that Life from the Loam. Let's get rid of it, um, and leave up Elvish Reclaimer for another uh, activation here. So the end of their turn, they're probably going to blow up the Blast Zone, but I'm going to get some value out of this uh, Elvish Reclaimer here and get myself a second Cloudpost. And you'll see everything looks set up to be pretty uh, juicy for the rest of the turn. Exploration was actually a good draw there. Usually by turn 6, that hasn't come up before where exploration's good, unless I have a one ring. But I didn't mind it getting blown up because I emptied my hand already. Um, I was able to play 2 lands this turn, and we don't have Life from the Loam or Ramun Up Excavator or Crucible of Worlds in this list, so there's not really any reason to not just dump that, even though our opponent is gonna blow it up. So they did end up blowing up the Blast Zone, and I just responded by fetching up some more Cloudpost action. At the end of their turn, I believe I'm just going to search up a big dude, big Eldrazi, and then untap and cast it. Annihilate some stuff from the face of Dominaria, exile them. So stage, then attack for good measure. And you would think that maybe we'd be in a place where our opponent would scoop, but they weren't done yet. They had some more action. They had some more business. I wanted to make sure I copied the Caracas before they could sacrifice, well, before it got blown up with Ulamog. I think I should have probably done that a little bit earlier, to be honest with you. So that was maybe not the wisest sequencing. A lot of times if you just have a Caracas when your Eldrazi are out, it's just good game, because obviously you can bounce them. Now here, note that our opponent can attack us for 20. However, thanks to the card Glimmerpost, we're at 24. So if our opponent attacks us for 20, no big deal. We go to 4 and swing at them for lethal next turn. So super relevant in the lands matchups to make sure you play a Glimmerpost and get above 20 life. Tony Murata, aka Interplay, taught me that. If you like my stuff, you should check out his channel. He's the probably most prolific Cloudpost player in the world. Amazing player. That's how I learned how to play this deck. So game 2. We lead off. Our opponent takes our Force of Vigor and casts Surgical Extraction, targeting our Force of Vigor, which is not a big deal. We don't really need it. They exile them all, play Urza Saga. So the first needle always is on Wasteland. The second needle looks like we're going to play in name Urza Saga. We don't want to have to deal with any of those pesky tokens or anything. Our opponent casts a Pithing Needle of their own, naming the One Ring, since they saw it earlier. We still don't have a green source at this point. We need one to find to be able to play any of our spells. And our opponent resolves their Urza Saga trigger, gets an expedition map, finds a Thespian stage, and again 21. That's a magic number against Dark Depths. So we untap and are able to find a Cloudpost, and I don't think our opponent is too happy about that. I believe they blow it up here in a second. So now they are threatening the 2020, but we do have a crop rotation. On the other hand, we do not have green mana. We do have a one ring to give us protection from a turn, which is super relevant as well. So I think that's what we end up doing here, casting a one ring and passing the turn. Our opponent makes a 2020 and then wastelands us. Abrupt decays our Pithing Needle on Wasteland. Yeah, it gets rid of our Cloudpost. We still don't have any green mana at this point. That turn happened super fast. Sorry about that. So now we top deck the best card, Caracas, bounce our opponent's Merit Lodge. We still would have had an entire turn cycle because we're at 21, but that really helped us. And now at this point, our opponent found Life from the Loam with loads of super relevant lands. And yeah, we just had to evoke our endurance there and get rid of that. So now it's kind of anybody's game at this point. I believe we are ahead here. However, that might be wrong because they do have Life from the Loam, so that's their engine. They're just gonna, get out of control pretty fast. Luckily, I top decked a Pithing Needle, naming Wasteland again, so we stabilize our mana base here. And from this point, our opponent finds another Wasteland with Life from the Loam, a Thespian stage. We untap, and still looking for that green source. Still no green source. Our opponent has an Urborg, so we can make black mana. We can't make any green mana at this point in the game. So at the end of the turn, nothing super relevant. It's just kind of draw go. Our opponent has to deal with our Pithing Needles. But this is a pivotal moment in the game. Our opponent blows up our Cloudpost. So they were able to get rid of our one ring with a Besiju who endures. I'm sorry, they were able to get rid of our Pithing Needle on Wasteland with Besiju who endures. And then they proceeded to no, how did that work? Oh yeah, so then they wastelanded our Cloudpost. So with the search from the Besiju on our Needle, we got a forest. And then from that point, we're in a really good position because basically crop rotation. So now they play Life from the Loam. I think I respond here, getting another Bojuka Bog, Vesuva copying Bojuka Bog, and kind of just like resetting the score here. Because now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mana. We got a Once Upon a Time and a Green Sun Zenith, so super money spells. And that was during their turn, so we get to untap and still not taking any damage from the One Ring. Of course, because our opponent has Needle naming the One Ring. Find our second green source, which is, again, huge. And I believe we get a Reclaimer here, the all-star of the deck, and our Reclaimer's a 3/4. Our opponent did not dredge, surprisingly. I think dredging would have been a pretty wise choice for them. I wonder what they were hoping to top deck. And at this point, we want to get them off of Life from the Loam. So now our opponent is stuck with a board of lands that don't really do much, since I have the Pithing Needle on Urza Saga. They are able to make another Saga, so that is relevant, especially if they're able to deal with our Pithing Needle. They draw a Tabernacle and play it. Not the biggest deal. We can afford to pay right now, especially since we have an active Reclaimer. We're just working our way to Cloudpost mana. Our opponent gets a Wasteland. But here's the thing. We have... So our one of Endurance is in play. No, I think we're playing a few Endurance in this list. to it, that is. So we can get back Ivugin two different ways. One way we can, if we are able to get another Endurance in play, we can shuffle our own graveyard into our library, or we just have Echoing Deeps. If I could search that up at the end of their turn, can just copy a Ivugin in the graveyard. So that's probably what I'm going to do at the end of their turn. And not sure why I didn't attack there. I should have attacked for good measure. But our opponent realizes at this point that they're too far behind. There's nothing they can do, and they end up scooping. So that was round 3. Round 4 versus Larson. We mulligan, and yeah, mulligan on to 6, lead off with basic forest, top deck an elvish reclaimer. Of course, that's the best card in this deck. Always want to play that early game. Vesuva copies forest. We want to stabilize our mana base against death and taxes here because they are full of wastelands. Vesuva on forest was not even bad right there. We didn't really have too many other plays anyhow. Yeah, sure, there was crop rotation, but we're not going to crop rotation a forest away since it's already protected from wasteland. We can save our crop rotation for later. So our opponent develops a fairly decent sized board state here to begin with, but no real pressure, no wastelands, no Rashidun ports. They got 2 cards in hand. They got 2 vials out. So we're not too. The only thing we're really worried about here at this point in the game is port or wasteland. So you can see there at the end of the turn, we searched up for a Cloudpost and then used our crop rotation for the second Cloudpost because we had the Bosiju in hand, and now it is prime time. Prime time of your life. That's a Daft Punk. For all you Daft Punk fans out there. So now we got the Tabernacle and Cloudpost. We're sitting in a pretty good spot. I mean, our opponent's got to tap out if they want to keep their creatures. I can't imagine that they would want to keep all of their creatures. They don't really need 2 Mother of Runes. Protection doesn't absorb damage from trample. So they do end up just getting rid of the 1 Mother, and then they scoop from there. Game 2, we dropped game 2 to Death and Taxes again. I guess that's the second time in this league we dropped a game. Let's see where we went wrong. So the One Ring can be a bad card against Death and Taxes if they get a Thalia out sometimes. So let's see if we find a green source from this Once Upon a Time. No green source, so that was kind of rough. But we do have the Pithing Needle for Wasteland, so that's pretty relevant. Now, if our opponent leads off here on a Stoneforge Mystic and gets Culture Complete, then they have a really fast clock. That's oftentimes one of the only ways we lose to Death and Taxes in this scenario. So, especially since I don't have any green mana, there's not a whole lot to be done right here. They have like a 4-turn clock now, 3-turn clock basically at this point, and they have port backup, so they have a lot of tempo. And here I untap, play a Cloudpost, and as you can see, we're just really far behind here. Our opponent's got 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 coming in, so we got 1 more turn to draw. We need exactly Yavimaya Cradle of Growth here, I think. Nope, that wouldn't even do it because they have 2 Rashidun ports. We're just way too far behind here. Can't cast our One Ring. And I think that's just kind of how it goes sometimes. So you do usually side out like 3 of the One Ring against Death and Taxes because of Thalia and Port. It's not the best card. We don't really need it to beat them anyways. It's still a good matchup even pre the One Ring. So our opponent gets Thalia out. Um, we're able to get a Glacial Chasm, sacrifice our Caracas. Realistically here though, we're at 5 life. We got like a turn to um, to find something relevant. I don't think there's anything really I could have drawn here to get us out of this mess. I probably should have just scooped here, but let's just see. This deck, sometimes pulls itself out of the most dire circumstances. There is a crop rotation here. So if I crop rotation for Cloudpost at the end of their turn and top deck a Glimmer Post, for example, I'd be able to cast uh, the One Ring and go from there. But our opponent finds a Flicker Wisp and exiles Glacial Chasm for the turn and swings in for a lethal. Basically, I just conceded right there. Off to game 3 on the play. Got a nice 6 here. Ended up with Dismember is mostly just there for Culture Complete. Turn 1 Reclaimer is great. They deal with it with the swords. And the beauty of Green Sun Zenith, you just get another one. So Wasteland there is not the best, but it's not that detrimental. We got our second untapped mana source. And at the end of their turn here, we can just blow up this land here. Oh, we blew up their Ether Vial with Pasiju rather than activating. That was a strange choice on my part. I guess I was just thinking like Vial could help them run away with the game, maybe. Uh, yeah, very very strange. I don't even know what's going on here, and I'm the one who played it. We're lucky that stuck around. Little sloppy playing there, you can see, but now our brain's back intact and we are on track. So again, we're just holding up this dismember mostly for Culture Complete. We could probably just dismember this Flicker Wisp depending on how things go if we end up needing to. Ooh, that was a perfect top deck for us. Gets us the prime time. And I can't see us losing from here. I think we get Ayavugan and Cloudpost and just pass the turn. Even with Port, I think they need like Wasteland and something else. Yeah, so our opponent just scoops. We get there. And yeah, that was versus Larson. And then I think that was 1, 2, 3. That was match 4. Match 5, it was a couple of quick ones against, I think it was Mono Red Prison. I could be wrong. Let's see. All right, so 5 lands in hand, and 2 spells, 2 really juicy spells. That's not a bad hand. That's a pretty decent start. We got a green source. We got 2 of our favorite spells, and this is cool because we got Green Sun Zenith. So even though they have Chalice on 1, we get our Reclaimer anyways. That's one of the beauties of having Green Suns in your deck, because we can play around Chalice on 1 and get our engine going with the Reclaimer. Broadside Bombardiers, they play it, blow up our Reclaimer. But we're just going to keep ramping here, hoping to dodge a Magus of the Moon or a Blood Moon. I think we might end up getting kind of lucky in that regard. Nope, I lied. They casted Magus of the Moon. So here noted that a lot of times in the situation, um, you could wait for the Magus of the Moon to come out. Like if you have a Dismember, obviously that's game one, so we don't have Dismember. But um, if you have Dismember, you can let their Magus resolve and then search for float a green and then search for Dark Depths and then blow it up the Dismember. Obviously, here I just decided to go for the 2020 in response to their Magus, and that was a good game. That was like really quick one. Then next game we bring in the Dismembers and some other juicy stuff, Force of Vigors and Dismembers mainly. And also, if it were in paper, I would have a Mawlock. So our opponent's got double Chromox. That is kind of balls to the wall, all in. Lead off on a Rabble Master. And in this situation, it's worth noting that it's totally worth it to just dismember their Goblin Rabble Master, because otherwise it's just gonna run away with the game. So during their upkeep, I pitched the Primeval Titan and cast Force of Vigor, blowing up their both of their Chromox. So this game was a huge blowout. Like blowing up double Chromox is just kind of brutal. And our opponent also being able to answer our opponent's Rabble Master. At this point, Ancient Tomb into like a Blood Moon effect would be pretty brutal, but we get our Elvish Reclaimer out, so our opponent can't even attack us. And at that, we're still at 14 life. And we draw into another Dismember. Honestly, I've been thinking about having 4 of them lately sometimes, especially since I've seen more 4-color control lists running Opposition Agent. It's a clean answer to that. So now here it is again. Opponent casts Magus of the Moon. We just make the Dark Depths. We even had another option. We could have just done the Dismember, but this way we get to save our removal spell for if we need it. So yeah, that was the league 5-0. Thanks for tuning in. It was a fun list, but I am gonna be tuning it back to more of a traditional list. I'm gonna cut the One Rings for a while, which many will say that's a terrible idea. Tony Murata, aka Into Play, made a comeback recently and got 12th in the last challenge with no rings and his just traditional unchanged list from last year. That really inspired me to go back to that fundamental kind of just like consistent version of Post. So yeah, expect some more standard lists from me moving forward. Yeah, thanks again for tuning in, and hope to see you in the next video.